Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into something really important, but, definitely sensitive territory. We're focusing on that recent, really pivotal plea deal involving Bryan Kohberger,
Mhm.
the person accused in those tragic 2022 University of Idaho student killings. Our goal here is to really understand the agreement itself, but also the huge impact it's having.
Yeah.
We want to unpack the specifics, the reactions from the families, which are surprisingly varied and frankly heartbreaking, and maybe the strategic thinking behind it all.
It is. It's a heavy topic, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But it really shines a light on this core tension in the justice system, doesn't it?
How so?
But you have the legal system striving for, certainty, efficiency maybe.
Yeah.
And then you have the incredibly personal, often clashing ideas of what justice or closure even means for the people most devastated by it all.
That's a really important frame for this.
Yeah, this isn't just about this one case. It's kind of a deep dive into what we even ask of our courts when something truly terrible happens.
Okay, so let's start with the basics then. What exactly is in this plea deal? Can you walk us through what our sources are saying about the agreement?
Sure. So, based on everything we've looked at, on June 30th, 2025, Bryan Kohberger agreed to plead guilty.
Okay.
Guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. This is all tied, of course, to those awful killings back on November 13th, 2022, the 4 University of Idaho students.
Right. And what does he get, so to speak, in return for pleading guilty? What are the terms?
The terms seem pretty straightforward. In exchange for that plea, he avoids the death penalty.
Okay, no death penalty.
Instead, he gets 4 consecutive life sentences, and crucially, without the possibility of parole.
4 life sentences, no parole.
And another really significant piece of this is that he gives up his right to appeal.
Ah.
He can't appeal the conviction or the sentence. So he's basically waiving any future legal challenges.
So it locks it in, guarantees he stays in prison forever, provides that legal finality.
Pretty much, yes.
So what's the immediate next step now that this agreement's been reached?
Well, the big date is July 2nd, 2025. That's when the plea hearing is scheduled.
Okay.
That's when the Judge John Judge, has to formally decide whether to accept the deal or reject it.
So the judge has the final say on whether this goes through.
Exactly. His decision is paramount right now. It sets the course for everything else.
And this is where that tension you mentioned earlier just really hits home. It's incredibly tough to even talk about. When this news broke, the reactions from the victims' families, well, they weren't unified at all. Our reporting shows a really clear division.
It really does. It lays bare just how personal grief is and how differently people define justice. You have the Goncalves family. Kaylee's father, Steve, her sister, Aubrey, they expressed, well, deep outrage.
Yeah, I saw those reports.
They said they weren't even consulted before the deal was made public. They called it shocking and cruel.
Hmm.
For them, justice meant a full trial, seeing all the evidence presented publicly, and potentially the death penalty.
Their words were incredibly strong. Things like, "We are beyond furious at the state of Idaho," and
What?
"This is anything but justice."
Yeah, it's almost impossible to fathom the weight of this for them. For the Goncalves family, this certainty, this deal, it doesn't sound like closure at all.
Not in the slightest.
How incredibly difficult must that be for the prosecution, trying to navigate these completely opposing needs from the families they represent?
It's got to be an incredibly difficult position. The legal system is built for finality, for resolution in a legal sense. But that doesn't always map onto the ongoing messy reality of human grief.
Right.
What feels like closure to one family can feel like a complete betrayal, a denial of justice to another.
Yeah.
Look at the Mogan family. Madison's father, specifically, he came out in support of the deal.
Okay, so a different perspective there. Yeah. Their stated priority was closure, certainty. He was quoted saying things like, "We can actually put this behind us and think about the rest of our lives." It just highlights this profound gap in what different families need or want from the process after something so horrific.
And it wasn't just those two families, right? Our sources suggest the Chapin and Kernodle families were maybe less public, but there wasn't a consensus there either. Support and opposition were kind of split across the board.
That seems to be the case, yes.
Ah.
No single unified voice from the families emerged on this.
Okay, so with such strong conflicting feelings from the families and knowing just how intense the public spotlight has been on this case, why? Why would prosecutors offer this deal? What were the strategic calculations behind it, beyond just the legal nuts and bolts?
Well, if you step back and look at legal strategy, especially in cases this big, a few key reasons usually surface. First, Prosecutors almost always want a guaranteed conviction. Accountability, that's certain. They want to avoid that incredibly long, uncertain appeals process that almost always comes with a death sentence. You know, capital cases can be tied up in appeals for decades. Sometimes they get overturned on technical grounds, not even about guilt or innocence. This deal just cuts all that off.
So certainty now versus a potentially decades-long gamble. Okay. What else? Particularly thinking about the human cost of a trial like this.
That's another huge factor, avoiding more trauma for the families. Officials specifically mentioned that this deal spares the families from having to sit through a long, graphic trial.
Oh, absolutely.
Reliving every horrible detail, hearing incredibly painful testimony. That's an immense burden.
Yeah.
And some families very clearly said they wanted to avoid that.
Yeah, that desire to shield them from more pain must weigh heavily. What about the case itself? Did the prosecution feel confident they had the evidence for a trial conviction anyway?
It seems so. The research indicates the case against Kohberger was quite strong. You had the DNA evidence from the knife sheath found at the scene. That felt significant.
Right, that was widely reported.
Plus, cell phone records putting him near the house, surveillance video, even some online purchases linked to him. So, from the prosecution's viewpoint, they likely felt they had a very solid case, probably strong enough to convince a jury.
So they felt they had him, essentially, but still chose the plea deal route to bypass a death penalty trial. That's an interesting calculation.
It is.
What about the defense? Was their strategy or potential strategy a factor in the prosecution offering this?
Oh, absolutely. Kohberger's lawyers weren't just sitting back. They had already filed motions arguing he wasn't even eligible for the death penalty.
On what grounds?
They cited his diagnosed autism spectrum disorder, ASD, as part of their argument against capital punishment. They were also challenging the admissibility of some key evidence. So they were clearly signaling they were ready for a long, tough legal fight if it went to trial.
So that threat of a protracted battle, potentially years of motions and challenges. Exactly. That could mean more delays, more complexity, maybe even the risk of a mistrial down the line or grounds for appeal later. Prosecutors generally want to avoid all that if they can secure a guaranteed serious conviction.
Okay, so taking all that into account, the need for certainty, protecting families, the strong evidence, but also a prepared defense, what happens after this July 2nd hearing?
Well, like we said, judge makes the call, accept or reject.
Right.
If he accepts it, sentencing should follow pretty quickly, likely still within July. And the really critical part, because Kohberger waived his post-conviction appeal rights in the deal,
Yes.
that life sentence becomes essentially final. Barring some truly extraordinary, almost unheard of legal intervention later, that's it.
So, legally speaking, if the judge accepts this deal, the case is effectively closed. Done.
For all intents and purposes, yes.
But even with legal finality, what about the other impacts? The public reaction, the community, how does everyone move forward when there's such a fundamental disagreement about whether this is justice? Well, that's the lingering question, isn't it? The legal and public impacts are huge, and they'll last.
Yeah.
You might still hear from families who object during the hearing itself. Their disagreement highlights that this fracture, this division, it remains. The community, both locally in Idaho and nationally, is clearly split on whether this outcome truly serves justice. It's a real crossroads moment. And it's just a stark reminder that legal closure doesn't automatically mean emotional closure for everyone involved.
What a profoundly complicated situation. This plea deal, it definitely guarantees Kohberger spends the rest of his life in prison. It avoids that potentially agonizing death penalty trial for the system, and perhaps more importantly for some, for the families. But wow, it also creates this deep divide among those same families and the public watching. For some, it genuinely seems to offer a way to find closure, a chance to, as one father said, put it behind them.
Yeah.
But for others, it feels like justice denied, like they were cheated out of the full public accounting they felt the victims deserved.
See, exactly. This agreement, ensuring life without parole but skipping the death penalty trial, it really forces us to grapple with some tough questions about our justice system. And for you, listening, it kind of leaves us wondering, doesn't it? In these incredibly complex cases where the law aims for certainty and families are dealing with unimaginable loss, what does justice really mean? What does closure mean? And is it even possible for everyone to find those things in the same outcome? That July 2nd hearing is definitely a pivotal moment. It will shape the immediate future here. But those underlying questions, those are going to stick around long after the judge makes his decision.